Hi, I'm Tessa Arcilia. In Choices and Chances, I use my own style of interviewing, honed through decades as an international news presenter and correspondent, to delve into a new topic each week and interview some of the most inspiring people in the world. Life is a series of choices, choices that give us chances to live our best lives. My goal is to turn the wisdom of people I talk to and lessons from my own experiences into ideas you can use. So if you'd like to be inspired by other stories, hit the subscribe button and join the community. Hi, Richelle. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to talk.
And we've been in the same industry for a long time.
News continues here on Al Jazeera after the stream, and visit our website, aljazeera.com.
We've never really crossed paths, but we have a lot of mutual connections, and I know of you. So, if people looked you up, they would see who Richelle Carey is. But in your words, who is Richelle Carey, especially now when you're in a different stage in your life?
You're making me think about how you define yourself in those little taglines, like on LinkedIn, or because when you're forced to really describe yourself in a very succinct way, right? So I would say, first, I am Avery's mom, the mom of a 3-year-old. I am a former news presenter or anchor, depending on what part of the world you're from, means the same thing. And so I would still consider myself a journalist and a communications professional. But first and foremost, a mom.
How does that feel, saying that out loud? You now say, I'm a mom.
It still feels really odd, which I know is crazy because he's 3.5 years old. I should be used to it now, but it still feels weird just because I never, I always just assumed I would have a family, but it wasn't something I thought a lot about. Like my cousin and I are the same age. We're 5 months apart, and she couldn't wait to get married and have babies in her 20s, right? I just wasn't wired that way. Even though I was oh, I'll be a mom. So now that I actually am a mom, and it's oh, that's actually me, and it's actually the coolest feeling in the world. So I love saying it.
As you were saying earlier, when you're put into a position you never imagined that you'll be. So now I have got 2 stepsons, and that's, it just opens up a whole new world of feelings and identity, and it feels good, and you didn't expect that, right? And just for context for people listening, because I asked you how it feels like to be a mom, the reason I asked that is because of the story that you've put out quite recently. And that's the reason why I also reached out. You made this huge decision to leave an amazing career. I followed you on Al Jazeera. You were at CNN before. And you left that because you had dreams of becoming a mother. And I'll let you tell the story.
I did. I had worked through local news, then I worked at headline news at CNN, then moved to Al Jazeera, and never in a million years dreamed that that's what my path would be. I'm oh, sure, I'm going to be an anchor in the Middle East. Never crossed my mind, but loved every minute of it. Absolutely loved it. It was a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful experience. Doha is a great place to raise a family. I was surrounded by colleagues that had kids, and I was, at this point, I was in my mid 40s, I guess, when I first moved there. And I wanted a family, but the irony of it for me was that while Al Jazeera is a great place to have a family, it's not a great place to get a family if you're a single American woman. So I had to make the choice, if I'm going to really do this, I'm going to have to go home. Now, before I actually, I've been thinking about moving home for a while, even before I decided, it's time to do it for adoption reasons. I actually gave my boss, 5 or 6 months notice, just to let him know, this is where my head is. I'm thinking it's time to go home. I had actually frozen my eggs when I was in my early 40s. And then I did try IVF when I was about 47. And when it didn't work, that's when the wheels were okay, if adoption is the route, it's probably going to be best to do that based home in the US. So now all that happened while the pandemic was starting. But this was already emotionally in the works for me that I was going to leave. And then when the pandemic happened, I was yeah, it's just time to go home. So I quit. And to my boss's credit, he was like, why don't you just like, take a year off and then you can come back. Like he really tried to talk me out of it, it always feels good when a boss does that. I had been on an adoption wait list before I moved home. So from the time I was on the adoption wait list to the time I actually got Avery, it was probably like 2.5, 3 years. But when I moved home to the US, it actually did make it easier to get him. So I moved home, and then about 7 months later is when I was matched with my little boy. Since then, you can't live on love. So I have been in career transition, as I say, thinking about what my next steps are going to be, and we'll talk about all that. I don't want to just go on this rant forever, but so that's where I am now. I'm home in the U.S. with Avery, leaving behind a career that I really loved, and figuring out some of what my next steps are. I actually do occasionally think about, okay, let's me and Avery move back to Doha, and if I could bring our village with me, then I would. But as you know, sacrifices and family and love require different things of you. And while I miss Doha at times, I would not trade being here in Houston with Avery and my parents and our family nearby.
That's so true. The sacrifice, I don't think anyone really realizes what that means until you're put in that position. Very simple things as who's going to pick up the kids. And you have to decide who's not going to be at work. And that's, it's for somebody who's not used to that, I think it's effort. And as you say, you can't live on love. And what I wanted to ask you is you went through
And I'm a
the
single
whole
mom. I guess
process.
let
It
me
sounds,
interrupt real quick too. I
yeah,
adopted as a single mom. So that's why the village is important no matter what, but the village is especially important when you are a single parent.
yes, very key in this story is that you did it on your own. And I'll get to that part as well because oh, so interesting. Your story, Rochelle, is just really incredibly interesting. Now, you went through the whole process. It means that you really committed to this. So, did you always know that you wanted to be a mom? And I know that is a question that a lot of women struggle with.
Mhm.
When I was young, I never cut out pictures of families and babies. I did of my career. I imagined my whole career,
Mhm.
but not really of a family. So, was that always part of what you wanted in life?
Yes, but in the background. Um, it wasn't something that I was really ever deliberate or intentional about or focused on. I just assumed, I'm going to do all this stuff that I want to do with my life and my career first. Then I'll meet some great guy and then we'll have a family. It just seemed like it was something that was just going to be automatic. And whereas, my cousin and I are maybe 5 months apart in age, and she got married very young in her 20s and had kids right away because it was something that felt much more pressing for her. So we're all wired different in that way. And some people are wired that, no, I don't ever want to do this, right? So we're all wired there. And then sometimes that wiring changes for reasons that you could never predict and depending on where you are in your life. So yeah, I just always assumed it would happen. And as I was in my 40s and I hadn't met anybody and it wasn't happening, then I did start to feel more of a sense of urgency about it. But it was never anything that I felt really pressed about in my 20s or 30s. No.
And now you're sharing your story. I actually also wanted to ask if did you get was it easy for you to share your story, and did you expect the kind of reception that you're getting now, really? Because I struggle with that. When we report, we're on camera, we talk about other people's lives, but I personally struggle with giving information about myself. Did you go through the same transition, and why did you start sharing your story?
I love talking to journalists. That is such a good question, Tessa. It really is. I love that question. Um, it was weird at first. And honestly, it was one of my very good friends who's a journalist who made me do this. She was like, you do realize that like your story is a story. I'm like, huh? She's like, yeah, your story is a story. There are women and people, men and women, but particularly women that can really relate to your story. Like you have to start talking about it. And it didn't compute for a while. And she kind of forced me to do it. She actually connected me with a friend of hers who worked at Essence Magazine. And that was the first interview that I gave talking about it. And then from there, it just kind of took off. ended up on Tamron Hall's show talking. Like it surprised me, and it probably shouldn't, because if it weren't me and the shoe was on the other foot, of course I would know it was a story. But it does feel weird when it's you. But now I'm used to talking about it. I'm comfortable talking about it. Almost every time I post a video or a comment or anything about what my journey has been, I get all kinds of messages from women. So I kind of feel like in some way it is my duty to get out of my own way and actually talk about
That's a great perspective. You know how we're kind of driven by duty. It's, I think that's a great perspective of thinking about it when you put content out there. And did you find yourself judging yourself based on what you thought other people would think of you before you made that leap or, made these decisions?
it. Yes, there were times I tried not to, but I'm human, right? And I feel that women are judged about these things in a way that men aren't. I remember when I was in my 30s, and a co-anchor of mine, a male co-anchor, said to me, and I wasn't married, no kids, obviously. And I remember he said to me, "Don't your parents want grandkids?" Now, what I forgot to say is he was older than me. Like, he was in his 40s. And my parents, to their credit, have never pressured me about anything, like no timetable, no nothing. And I said, "Well, don't your parents?" Because he also was single, right? So why did you, as a 40-something-year-old man, think that you got to question me about my life choices as a 30-something-year-old woman? If anything, if we're going to go by age, where you're the older one and you're not married and you don't have kids. But sometimes people feel like they can say those things to women. Which is just so obnoxious. So there were times that, yeah, sometimes I would wonder, are people wondering, why is she 40 something and still single and no kids? And then sometimes I'd be like, get over yourself. Nobody really cares enough about you to be that concerned about your life. And then I thought, and if those are some of the narratives that are still out there, it's not my business.
And what about deciding to do this on your own as a single mother? I imagine you would have thought about what that actually meant, doing it all on your own, from a resources point of view, time point of view, and also, I guess, from a social perspective, perception, and for your child, for Avery, what that would mean for him.
Yes, I did. I did not want to be a single mom, and that can be a loaded thing to say. I would venture to say I think most people don't want to be a single parent. That doesn't mean that there aren't people that want to be single, but this is when you're really a parent, you understand this is a lot for one person to do, regardless of what your resources are. Now, obviously, the more financial resources you have, yes, it can be easier because of the things that you can pay for, right? But even when you do have a good, solid income, a solid job, it's still a lot to do on your own. So yeah, I wasn't thrilled about that part, but I just felt like that if I was waiting to become a parent because I was waiting on having a partner, I was giving power to this imaginary person that may or may not come along, right? And then now that I actually am a single mom, I kind of like not having to run decisions by anybody about my kid. But I am still very open to the possibility of meeting someone and getting married and maybe bringing someone into the family that could actually be very good for Avery. I still am very much open to that. If it were up to me, I probably just wouldn't date. But and I'm not actually. But when I think about pushing myself to date, it is largely because of him. And the fact that just because I am an introvert and an only child and very comfortable in my own space, I owe it to him perhaps to see if there is somebody that can bring something really great to our life.
Ooh, I'd love to get to the love part, but we'll get there. And also, I'm so happy to hear you're an introvert. I just did an episode exactly on that topic, how I'm an introvert, and yet here we are in this field of ours. I do want to dig deeper into the IVF and adoption process, just because the IVF process, I know a lot of people who went through that process, and it's kind of normalized now. It's a very difficult process, emotionally draining,
Mhm.
that I've seen of my friends. You went through that, but I read something that you wrote where you said the adoption process was actually more emotionally difficult the first time that you didn't get chosen.
Yeah.
Just talk us through those differences.
So with the IVF, I knew going into it because of my age that it was a long shot that it was going to work. So my expectations were already um, right on par for what the chances were for it working. So when it didn't work, I was upset, but I wasn't devastated because I already knew, you should have tried this younger. This might not work. And something that I've come to realize too is I think another reason it wasn't as emotional for me as it is for some other women is because a lot of other women are doing this with a partner, with a husband or with a partner. And that may have an added pressure on them because there is somebody else involved. Whereas I didn't have that. I didn't feel like I would be letting somebody down if the IVF didn't work, which obviously you're not letting someone down, but it can be much more complicated when it's two of you doing it, right? So I did not have that. Um, with the adoption, um, it was what you do is you put together an adoption profile, like a book, right? That's got your life in it, your pictures. You have a home study. They go through your finance. Like it is now. I mean, I joke about how intense it was, but they're giving you a person. So okay, you get to check out everything you need to, right? And then the way my different agencies do it different ways, but the way my agency did it was they would send you information about a birth mother and a child. Sometimes the child had already been born, but by and large, the birth mother was pregnant at the time. And you can read as much information as they had, and then you could decide, okay, I want you to submit my book to her, right? And then you hope that she picks you because you don't know how many other books she may be getting. And that's when it started to feel like a rejection if she didn't pick you and she picked somebody else. So for that reason, it was much more emotional for me. There was one point at which I did say to my agency, okay, something about this child, yes, submit my book. And it was actually a couple. And they didn't pick me. They picked somebody else. And one of the reasons that they didn't pick me is because at the time I was living in Doha. Now, depending on your adoption, that may or may not matter because at the end of the day, even if you agree to an open adoption, right, you are still legally the parent. You can live wherever you want with the child, right? So it wouldn't have mattered whether I lived in Doha or the U.S. But when you're choosing to place your child for adoption, whatever criteria you want matter, right? So they rejected me, and I was like, well, did they see my book? Like, what? And it was not devastating, but it was jarring. So I think so. That was and that was the only time that I submitted my book. Then the way I got Avery was one day my agency called me on a Saturday morning and said, we have a birth mother who's come into the agency. Her child has already been born. He's about 6 weeks old. We want to show her your book, but we only want to show her your book if you are in a position to take a child right away. Because as I said, often what happens is the birth mother is pregnant. So you get matched and then you have a few months to prepare for the kid, right? And I was like, oh, okay, go ahead and show her my book. We'll see. Well, that was on a Saturday. The next day, I met her and Avery, and by Wednesday, I physically had Avery. So from the time I got a phone call to the time I had him was like 4 days. It was crazy.
When you made the decision to become a single mom, leave your job, decide that you're no longer waiting for the man, so what were the questions, or what was the process that went through your head that made you say, okay, this is now my decision?
Um, Asking myself what I want, asking myself, if this is what you want, why haven't you done it? Like, what actually is it that you're waiting on? And sometimes those reasons may be external reasons that actually are beyond your control. Sometimes that's the case, depending on what your situation is. But often what we find is those reasons are actually internal reasons that you actually can control. And once you make that decision, or those series of decisions, then it's remarkable that like you get a little fire lit under your behind, and then you just can't start doing things fast enough once you give yourself permission to do those things. I even remember, like I said, I had decided that I've been thinking about moving home even before adoption pushed me over the edge. And it was actually a friend of mine, one of my friends in the US, who had said to me, have you ever considered going on a sabbatical? And I was like, what? It's like a sabbatical, because it just never occurred to me not to work. And then he's like, I bet you probably have money saved. And that's when I started to realize, oh, all these sacrifices I've been making, living away from my family, moving here, there, and everywhere. I'm like, I actually do have money saved, and that money actually is to make choices like this. So I realized the checklist that I just gave you, let me be clear. I understand that comes from a place of privilege to be able to make choices in that space. And everyone can't make choices based on the criteria I just said. I completely understand that. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that I have been able to make choices from a place of privilege. But I do want to give myself a little bit of credit that with that privilege, I actually couple that with hard work, which then allowed me to be able to have these choices.
Now let's talk about love. I would. Do you need to get a coffee, maybe? um, what what did you learn from all those years, and how would you look at love now? And has that changed your expectations of a relationship? Have those changed? So where are you in your thinking of what love is, what you're looking for, and what that means to you?
It's a good question. I actually have given this a lot of thought recently because I wrote this piece the other day. No, it's the other day. I'm so bad at time. It was like a month ago. It wasn't the other day. Sorry. And the title, what did I title it? Should I date for the sake of my son? That's what I titled
I
it.
read that.
And then the subhead was an introvert's struggle with dating, right? So I've been in this space asking myself the questions you just asked for a while now, right? I My parents are married or still together. I'm very lucky. So I absolutely believe in what marriage can be, right? I just I struggle with the fact that at my age now, 52, I don't know how much compromise I have in me to take on a partner, because it still takes a lot of compromise. And I'm kind of set in my ways, and I know myself. So I am open to what a relationship can be. But at this age, and because Avery is my focus, I need it to be as low maintenance as possible. And I don't know if that's fair to think that way going into a relationship. It's not to say that I won't try, that I won't bring something to the table. But it's been me and Avery for 3.5 years. Anyone else that comes into the picture is going to have to realize that and accept that. And that can be kind of complicated. But I absolutely do believe in the idea um, of of two people complementing each other's lives. I do believe in that.
So you still believe in love, despite, because you kind of just said, I'm going to stop waiting for someone to come along, but you're still a romantic in some sense. You still believe in love
No,
itself.
I'm not. I do believe in love, but what I think love is at this age is different than what I thought love was in my 20s and 30s,
Okay.
right? So maybe I am still a romantic, but in my 20s and 30s, I mean, if we're just being completely honest, I mean, there was drama, there was all kinds of stuff. And I just think of love now, I hope, is not perfect, not easy, but comforting. And that may be boring, but that's okay too. That sometimes boring is good. So maybe I still am a romantic. I don't know, Tessa. I don't know. I want to be.
Watch the space. And something else that you had written that really resonated with me, and thanks for being so open about that bit. You wrote the article titled "The Happiness Hustle," which I think, for us who've left, I think I would consider myself having left that career, as I'm not a foreign correspondent anymore. Um, and then you see your peers doing really well, and you're happy for them, and it's because they're amazing at what they do. They're amazing people, but at the same time, you start looking at yourself, thinking, "Oh, what am I doing? Am I so successful?" How do you deal with that? And it is a real feeling. Um, yeah, and I love that you called it the happiness hustle. It's a great title.
It's interesting. I had been, what I put in that essay, I had actually been feeling and struggling with for a while. And then when I wrote it and got the responses that I did, I was like, it helped me so much to know that I wasn't the only one feeling that way. And that some of the people who commented were people whose careers I had admired for the longest time. And they had had lulls and ups and downs too. So I'm glad I wrote it because it seemed to be very relatable to people. It's like you said, I sometimes I wonder, did I peak already professionally? And number one, if I did, so what? That doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it's made me reevaluate what it means to peak, because what is the metric? What are we judging that by, right? I wasn't any more successful just because I worked at Al Jazeera had I stayed in local news. I wasn't a better person or a better professional because I achieved something like that, right? So it's caused me to kind of reevaluate what success means. And it can mean different things at different times in your life, when there's different pieces of the puzzle that you need to fit together. So I've stopped judging myself by my past. And I think we could all stand to do that. And also I'm glad we connected on LinkedIn, but we can all stand to take a break from LinkedIn every now and then too. Because you think that like Instagram pictures will make you be like, oh, where are they? What are they doing? No. When you're a grown up, LinkedIn is much worse.
Mm. That's such a good point. Yes. And I went through that phase as well of kind of just judging myself, but then now I'm at a point, and it's an amazing feeling, and I can say you can get to the other side of this. When I see things happening around me, I used to always want to be in the front line, go, "Oh, I wish I was covering that story. I don't actually. I don't. I'm so happy to be in the comfort of my
Yes.
home." And when there were elections here, and then the kids said to me, "Well, Tessa, if you were working, you wouldn't be here for dinner. You'd be out there covering this." I'm like, exactly. That's actually
Oh,
so true. And yeah, and I thought, I'm
that's
actually
so
perfectly
sweet.
happy. I'm perfectly happy not being out there, because what that actually means is being in the studio at midnight, is being up at 6 a.m. Like,
Yep.
we know the hustle.
Yep.
So that is a
Yep.
great feeling. So to anyone going through this process, there is the other side, and you will get to a point where you're actually okay and not bothered.
Absolutely.
That by everyone passing you by.
Absolutely.
Passing you by, it's a funny word too, because are they really? Like, it's your perspective.
I know, right?
But everyone's got just a different road to travel on, right?
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
just
And
thank you for
we
writing
have
it.
to be very, I'm sorry, I was talking over you. That's a
No,
little
no,
bit
no.
of a delay. It's the Australia to US connection. But we have to be careful about the words we use, and the way we frame things, because the words you use is how you internalize and how you think about it. And we have to constantly change those things.
I think one of the hardest things is the identity that we leave behind. I actually, as you said, I also still call myself a journalist, whether or not I have a position in a company that calls me as such. I say I'm a journalist, and I think you can claim that identity, and that's fine as well. Did you have that issue with your identity, and do you know
Yes.
your identity right now?
Yes. That is so true. Because for a while, I wasn't sure if I called myself a journalist or a former journalist, because I wasn't, employed at a proper network, right? And I'm glad you said what you said, because I gave about this just a few months ago, because I'm constantly changing my tagline on LinkedIn. And so, yes, I am technically a former network anchor. That is true, because that goes with what your job is. But just because I'm not working on air every day doesn't mean I'm any less of a journalist and don't still approach things and think things the same way. So, yay! I am glad. I'm glad that you feel the same way and that you validated that, because we are both journalists.
Yes, absolutely. And you claim your identity. And on that note, I do want to know what you are doing now, because I think you're doing something related to Iraqi Kurdistan. Did I read that correctly, or did I?
Yeah.
Um, is that
I
something
know why you're
related? But
thinking
I
that.
would like to know what you're doing now, include professionally and for women, because I think you're starting
Um,
something for
so
women.
the so the the Iraqi Kurdistan thing, I'm not personally, but I am head of media training for a company called Words Warriors. It's a company that's a communications firm that a friend of mine, he's a former colonel, Miles Kaggins, he's the coolest, started this company. Gosh, it's been a year and a half, maybe 2 years. So I'm doing some PR through that company and some media training. And part of what we do is translation work. He used to, when he was in the army, he was based in Kurdistan region. So yeah, if you look at the website, you might think that no, I'm not personally involved in that, but that is something that the company does, right? So I'm doing some of that. I'm doing some hosting and moderating. I have a couple of gigs lined up. I'm very excited about an event I'm doing next month for Reuters. They're having an AI convention, so I'm trying to do things like that, and I actually would like to do more of that. So as such, I am linked to some speakers bureaus, because my heart really is in hosting and moderating. I love that. I feel like the skill set that we have as journalists, and having been on television, is having conversations like exactly like this. And it's not as easy as people think. It is a skill set. And it's a skill set and a muscle that I like to use and work. So that's something I'm really trying to get to do more of. Um, I am working on pitching a docu-series and/or podcast um, for women, based loosely on what my journey has been, and for women that are reimagining how they create family. So I got that going as well. Um, and raising a 3.5-year-old who kept me up for 5 hours last night just because he was talking, just talking, just
The
talking.
best part, yeah, the best part of raising children. Um, you wrote something also about how you thought it would be easy, the opportunities would be coming to you, knocking on your door, and then you realize all of a
Hmm.
sudden you don't have your title, and well,
Hmm.
opportunities don't come
Hmm.
knocking on your door. What has the process been like for you, and what have you done actually to address that in your life?
That's a great question. That has been a little, I could either call it humbling or demoralizing. I'm not really sure which one. It was demoralizing for a while. I have worked my way through that, but I just assumed I would, well, I'm a former Al Jazeera anchor. I'm a former headline news anchor, blah, blah. Why don't you want me? Well, there's a lot of talented people in this space, and it is very, very competitive. And it's not a bad thing that I had to get knocked down a few rungs to really realize that, because it actually made me work harder pitching myself, refining my skills, and it's also um, I've had to learn different skills that I did not have, because you have a very specific, particularly when you're a presenter, you have a very specific skill set in a very specific environment, and newsrooms are not normal, right? They're not normal. Now, a lot of the skill set that I have from there can translate to other fields, but you don't know that at first. You really, at least I didn't. Like, even starting to do PR, I was like, I don't know how to do PR. And for the first month or two, I actually didn't. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, well, that's this, and this. But it can be, at least for me, it was a little intimidating to feel like I know how to do what I know how to do extremely well. I don't know how to do this other stuff. Well, actually, yes, you do know how to do this other stuff. So, because the hosting and moderating wasn't just beating down my door, I've had to pivot a little, and that's not a bad thing. Um, And in the course of that pivoting, it has helped me get other connections in the things that I really want to be doing. So things are definitely starting to pick up. But for a minute there, I was like, what have I done? But then most days I'm like, yay, I did it. Again, still not quite professionally where I want to be, but I'm definitely evolving and getting there.
So if you were to give advice to anyone who might be changing careers or suddenly found themselves out in the field again, what steps should they take? What should they be doing? One, to communicate themselves or pitch themselves better, put themselves out there, gather everything together, and muster up the courage to move forward again. So, what would the steps be for anyone who might need help?
I would say believe in yourself, but don't have an overabundance of pride. Have confidence, but I'll give you a perfect example. I connected, so one of the speakers bureaus that I'm listed with, it's a pretty prominent one, but because they're prominent, they have a stacked roster, right? And just because you're on the roster doesn't mean you're going to get booked. And I have not been getting booked with this particular roster. So on LinkedIn, I found a woman who's a top executive at this speaker bureau. I'm sure she has no idea who I am. Like she's way up there, right? Messaged her on LinkedIn, sent her a connection invite, told her that I had, been frustrated that I don't think I used that word. I was more tactful, but was very honest about the fact that, this hasn't been going as quickly as I wanted to. She responded to me, personally responded to me. First, it was just a thank you. And then a few hours later, she sent me another message and then gave me a tip, a reference for somebody to connect with who could help me with this. It took me being able to say, hey, this isn't going as well as I thought. And she responded. So what I mean by, again, I'm confident in who I am and in my abilities, but I didn't have too much pride to let her know, hey, I need some help.
And in anything that you've done in your life, and I mean any aspect, do you have any regrets that you wish you'd done better, differently, or are you the person who, lives without regrets? And I go, oh, it's fine. Are you that? Which one are you? And if you have regrets, what are they?
I've gotten much better about not having regrets. I did used to spend more time than I would like to admit going back to this point in my life or that point in my life, particularly when I was going through IVF. I would ask myself, why weren't you more intentional and deliberate about dating? You'd be married now and have kids and you wouldn't have to be going through something so emotional and so expensive, right? So I would say probably I spent more of my 40s really trying to backtrack, where did something go wrong? Except nothing did go wrong. It did not go wrong. It all happened the way it was supposed to. You just didn't know it at the time. So to that, I say, as a reformed regretter, don't dwell on regrets, because whatever it took to get me to this point that Avery is my child, he was supposed to be my child. Mm-hmm. So all those other steps and alleged mistakes actually weren't mistakes at all.
And as we come to the end of the podcast, I'd like to circle back to where we started. It's with your journey as a mom and with Avery. What is it about the world of adoption? I don't really know anything about it, that you wish or would like people to know, and especially for you as a mom, for the birth mother, and for Avery. What does that look like, and what's that world like?
I've had to learn a lot. The agency, I work with two different agencies, and one of the agencies is owned by an adoptee, and she takes very seriously educating people who want to adopt. It was required that I do a 2-day seminar in person. So, and I was actually living in Doha at the time, so I had to fly back to Texas, go to Austin for this 2-day seminar, and I learned a lot. And the seminar had adoptees, and it had birth mothers who had placed their children for adoption, so you could talk to and learn about everything. And I learned a lot. For example, so many of the stereotypes that we have are just not true. If you watch Law and Order, you'll think that there's birth mothers lurking around the corner wanting to kidnap their kids back. This is so much about the adoption world that we see on television is not true. I think one of the biggest lessons that I have learned from this is the way we frame and talk about adoption, in many cases, is wrong. We are not doing adoptive children a favor by adopting them. And I resent people who feel like their children, their adopted children, are supposed to be extra grateful to them. They should not. They don't owe you any more gratitude than a birth child owes a parent. We all, yes, I am grateful to my parents. We should all be. But an adoptive child doesn't owe you an extra layer of gratitude because you adopted them by any stretch. And I've also learned a lot about how even when adopted children know that their adoptive family loves them, it can still be very complicated and painful. So I'm doing a lot of reading on that so that I know how to have the appropriate age appropriate conversations with Avery. So yeah, I had to shatter a lot of myths for myself, and now I'm taking it upon myself to try to learn as much as I can. And when people ask me questions like you did, which thank you for asking, then maybe I can just put a little bit out there that'll maybe chip away at some of those stereotypes.
Yeah, and as you said, it's a complex emotional situation to be in, especially for Avery as he becomes aware of. You framed it really nicely in your article, how this story begins with someone else's difficult choice, and that is so layered. Like, how do you? I don't know. Like,
Mhm.
I don't really know how to dissect that. That's going to be something really huge for Avery,
Yep.
I suppose.
Yep.
To
And
prepare
one
for.
other thing actually that I learned too that the conventional wisdom decades ago was that you don't tell children they're adopted, or you don't tell them until they're much older. That's not the conventional wisdom now. The conventional wisdom now is start talking about it with them in a very young, age appropriate way. But you don't save it for like they're 10 or 12 and then sit them down and have some big talk with them, right? So I'm having to learn a lot, but this is my responsibility. I chose to be an adoptive mom, and I owe it to him to do as much learning and as much growth about this as I can.
Wow.
So,
I mean, this merits a whole other episode, but just for curiosity's sake, so what would be, I'm asking also because I entered into a situation where I am a stepmom. And then, so what does that mean from an identity point of view for the boys? Um, what, how do you, are there labels? I don't know. How do you name, sure, you're the mother and then there's the birth
so it
mother or this?
depends. Different parents do it different ways, and it also depends on whether the birth mother is actually still present. Because some
Mm,
people do have an open adoption where their child may see their birth mother maybe once a year, twice a year. So the language all varies depending on all those situations, right? Um, So some people will say, you have a tummy mommy, you have two mommies, you have me, and then you have a tummy mommy, and the tummy,
mm,
right? Now, Avery, I'm not in contact with Avery's birth mother right now, and I don't want to put too much of his personal business out there. But I can. We have books that we
mhm.
will start reading in the next few months, actually, that are for 3 and 4 year olds that talk about adoption. Like there's one book that I just bought called "And That's Why She's My Mommy," and it talks about, yeah, so those types of conversations. So it varies depending on what your situation is and what role the birth mother has. And I did the agency actually that I worked with. They require, like, they ask you in the interview process, do you believe in open adoption? And if you say no, they're not going to work with you. They absolutely want you to be open to having a relationship with the birth mother. You're not required to legally, but they want you to at least be open to it if it's a good situation for everybody. And I am open to it.
And I suppose again, every country would have different laws around this. And I read a bit about your
Yes.
conversation around adoption and other topics in the United States. But okay, to end this, I guess you have such a varied life. What are the biggest lessons that you can share? And also being in your 50s, I always see my life now when I make decisions. I always think in 7.5 years I'll be 50, and this is where I want my life to be. You're there, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
lessons learned you could share.
This one's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. You you don't know, you never know what's right around the corner in your life. Like you just don't know. You can make plans, you should make plans, but you don't actually know where you're going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now. So be open to that. I never was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be a 52-year-old single mom to a toddler. I never would have thought of any such thing, or I'm going to move to the Middle East. And be open to things that you didn't actually plan for, because you just don't know what that could bring, to your life. And I would also say, make choices based on you and not on other people's expectations of you, particularly if there are people that you don't even know and they don't know you. That should have no factor in what you do. So
Amazing. Thank you. And on that note, thank you so much, Richelle, for your time. And I know you have to get Avery. So
thank you,
that's
my
a
dear.
lot
I do have to
fun.
get Avery, and you're up so early. You need to go take a nap or something, don't you?
I might actually go back to bed.
Yay.
Thank you so much for your time, Richelle.
Thank you, dear.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating so others can find the podcast. Thank you for your company and see you next time.